So today we're going to get into back into sort of like as we're walking through our projects and building our stuff out and talking about how to create some sort of tips and tricks and tools of the trade of building software. The first week we talked about first time we talked about use cases. We talked a little bit about gathering requirements. We've talked a little bit about we're talking about building a catalog. So we're talking about sort of at a high level data architecture kind of approach. This time we're going to talk about sort of the next step after requirements. We're going to talk about a clickable demo. And so, continuing forward and creating a software solution, this would be, after we've done some use cases, we've put some requirements together, sort of got a very high level, maybe preliminary design. This tool or this approach, this step in the process of a clickable demo has actually turned out to be very useful over the years. So a lot of projects that I've worked on that this has worked very well, that's led to success, and definitely keeps communication lines open. So I think it's a good first step if you're getting into actually building some software. So the first thing we want to do is let's just talk about sort of how we've gotten here. So we've put together a project and we have some sort of a why for a project. It's our key question, problem that we want to solve. In the goal tracker app that we talked about a couple weeks ago that I'm sort of using as a example as we go through this, we looked at some of the use cases. The why was really boiled down to wanted to supply a way for people to track goals, annual goals, and of course roll them up from quarterly, monthly, maybe weekly, depending how granular we wanted to get. And then, of course, in that discussion, we talked about defining requirements and use cases, figuring out what really it is, what do you want to build? So it's that step beyond, I want to build a house. Okay, that's very not useful. So what about the house are you envisioning? And so, if in building a house, keeping that example, it'd be stuff like, well, I want 3 bathrooms, I need a kitchen, I need 4 bedrooms, I need a half bath, I need a living room, a dining room, working your way through that. And then, of course, at each of those, well, okay, in the bathroom, do you want it to be tile? Do you want it to be linoleum? Do you want it to be carpeted or wood, floors? What colors you want on the walls? All of those little requirements, those details that make up a project. Can't skip those in software either. So just saying, hey, I want an app that tracks some goals is not going to be enough. We have to get deeper into it for requirements. Now, getting to this point, now we've sort of, once you've put the basic use cases together, as we talked about, you sort of get from that a rough idea of the interface. So now they're, as part of the use cases and the requirements, there may be some wireframes have been put together. There may be some sketches, even if it is on a napkin somewhere. But you basically have, you have sort of a rough idea. The team is starting to get a shared view. Everybody's a little different, but of what this thing's going to look like. And definitely from the use cases, we've got a general application flow because we've designed that out because that is part of the use cases. Is putting that flow together. So the purpose of a clickable demo. Clickable demo, we're going to really the focus of this, the real reason to put a clickable demo together is to give a document that allows people to look at it and see what the software is, as opposed to have to envision it themselves. So, we had the use cases that we looked at. It's all words, not a lot of pictures. Requirements documents are going to be the same. Now, you may have these wireframes and a few screenshots or something like that, but it's still going to be disjoint. It's still you're not going to easily be able to communicate the flow and the details that are involved in the application itself. So that's what the clickable demo does, is it provides you something to say, okay, yes, we've documented some use cases and some requirements, but now this is sort of what it's going to look like. This is, it's giving them a toy to play with a little bit, as opposed to just having to read it all on paper and figure it out. Something they can actually get some of that user experience translated to them as well. And of course, as part of doing it, we want to highlight the requirements. So the requirements that have been specified by the customer or the designers, we definitely want to bring that out in the clickable demo. That's the whole point, is to see is to provide a way to see these things working in concert or not, depending on how well the design worked and how complete the design is. And again, the key to this is application flow, because that we know we've got that roughed out in the use cases. So that's something that we can, instead of just some screenshots like you would see in a requirements document, now we can see a much easier way, in a demo of a clickable demo, we're going to see you walking through, the home page and then clicking on a navigation item and then going to another page. And then how does that flow? So all of that, that piece you can really nail down with a clickable demo. And of course, the point of all of this is to make sure that we do have everything designed. We have all requirements, we have all the flows, everything's mapped out. And a clickable demo will start, it exposes the gaps. So you're going to see stuff where, they may have said, oh, we only have 3 screens. And you walk them through the 3 screens, and they say, well, wait a minute, how do we do X? How do we report on what we just did? How do we search for data that we just entered in the system? Oh, well, those are gaps, and so we're going to have to add those to the clickable demo. And of course, go ahead.
Quick question. So should the clickable demo be done into, like, let me say, the Spring Source tool or whatever you want, whereby it's usable by a user, or it's just pretty much just a printout whereby, hey, you click here, you click there, or something like that?
It can actually be a little everything, and that leads us, I think, into... Yeah, it really leads us into this next slide, which is a good transition question there. Because a demo can actually be anything. And what you want to do is you want to suit it to the application that you're building, so that it is as close as you can get without spending a whole lot of time, because it's got to be quick. You want to be able to throw this thing together in hours or maybe a few days, depending on what your cycles are. But you want it also to have at least it has to be very relatable to what the end product is. So a clickable demo in general works awesome with the web application, because then what you can do is you throw some HTML together, you slap some pages in, you build a couple links, you hardwire everything, and boom, you've got a clickable demo. For desktop applications, you can do it, and it's actually not a bad idea to actually use HTML as your design tool for doing the desktop application. Unless you have a tool, Visual Studio, I think, will do some. You can do some screen painting and stuff like that. If you've got some really good visual building tools, then you can probably do a demo that way. But a lot of times with desktop applications, if it's not an HTML-based solution, then I'll see people use like PowerPoint or Keynote or something like that, one of those kind of tools, because PowerPoints aren't too bad. You can show a screen and say, if you click on this, and then it'll jump to another slide, and you can sort of navigate your way through that. It's navigation by screenshots. You can also build it literally. We've done a couple times with truly screenshot, as you just go into like Photoshop or something like that, or tool we looked at last week. You can look at something like that where you just have a very simple mock-up tool that you can build that. You turn them into JPEGs or PDFs or something like that, and then have a nice little navigation system that will navigate across those files. Again, you could use HTML to pop those up, or a lot of those have some way to reference, have ways to build links into the resulting documents. So you can use PowerPoint. And like I said, there's all these prototyping. So if you just like Google prototyping tools, you're going to find a lot out there. And some of them are really good and really complex. Some of them are pretty simple. But for something like this, for this clickable demo, simple is not bad. Something that doesn't go, part of the point is for this to be a way, as we said, to show the flow and they get a little bit of that user experience, but also we don't want to get ourselves tied into anything while we're doing it, because all of it could change. Once we put it in front of a customer, they could change every bit of it. So any time that we invest, theoretically, we want to consider it almost a throwaway, that it's stuff that we may not use any of what we build in a clickable demo. Ideally, we'd be able to reuse stuff, but there's no guarantees. All right, so we talked about what it is. So now, how do you start? Where do you start to begin to build a clickable demo? Well, as I said, the experience, the function and the features that's the goal. What has been defined as part of the requirements and the use cases, those are the pieces that definitely need to show up in a clickable demo. So you want to put those together first. An easy way, like if it's an HTML demo and you've got a use case, would be just walk through the steps of the use case, and it's you should be able to see from that. You should be able to model. Oh, here would be a screen. Here would be a link. Here would be a button. Whatever it is. And so now you should be able to look at that as building your clickable demo. If I've got a 10-step use case, then my clickable demo should be able to model those 10 steps and say, okay, this is how this would work. And that's your starting point. You're going to start from the main pages. So if you're walking through, let's say you've got some number of use cases, you've got, say, a dozen use cases. Well, as you're looking through each of those and the steps of those, there's going to be pages that, or views that, or screens that are going to sort of pop out as you're looking through those steps. So go ahead and build out those pages first. Say, oh, I've got a home page. I've got a data editing page. I've got a search page. I've got a results page, things like that. Go ahead and build those out, because you want to have, those are your user experience. So go ahead and build those out. They don't have to be super impressive. They can be black and white, not formatted, something like that. Very simple, but you at least need to have a model for those pages, because that's a starting point for that page. Once you've got the pages built, go ahead and start linking them, because now, the pages give you the basic view. You build the links to get the flow. So it's how are these things going to link together? How are these pages going to interact? And then once you've got that basic framework put together, which could be very much just some wireframes and some links, then you start adding some look and feel stuff. So maybe you want to put a little formatting to it. Maybe you want to put something that shows the data types that are there. Maybe like, hey, this is actually a date that's going to have a date selector somewhere. You may want to do stuff like, well, we're always going to have this header. We're going to have this menu. This button's always going to be there. Where you have the ability to reset the whole process. There'll be some reset button or a log out. Those kind of things that you will add as needed and as time allows. Again, you don't want to go nuts. But for example, in a web demo, you may want to, you throw some HTML together, you've got some links, you've hard-coded some data, maybe put a CSS style sheet or two into it, and then you maybe add a style here or there as needed. And again, thinking that all of this could be thrown away, so you don't want to spend too much time on it, but you do want to be able to at least give a sense of where you're going. Once you've built those pieces, now we're going to start focusing more on the fields and the types. So you've got the pages put together, and you probably got some data there. But now the next pass through is, let's go back through. You go through those use cases, look at the steps, look at the data that you're capturing or that you're displaying, and you're going to make sure that stuff has been put on the screens, where they need to be. So if I see a series of steps for for the goal tracker, if I see a series of steps there and I'm entering a goal and I see, well, a goal's got a start date and an end date and difficulty and a name, I want to make sure those things show up on the pages, that show up on the clickable demo, because that's what the users are going to be, the customer is going to be looking at. They're going to say, well, how do I capture this value? How does this value show up? So that's your next step. But you've built your framework. Now let's add some details to it. Once you've got some of that in, you're going to put in some meaningful labels to help help somebody looking at the screen so that it's user friendly to some extent. And use data when you're putting in hard-coded data, which you're doing with this clickable demo. Make it data that makes sense. So don't just put, and you'll see some of this as we go into some examples, where some bad examples of bad data, like item 1, item 2, item 3, label 1, label 2, label 3, things like that. Instead, make it something useful. For example, we talked about a student registration. In a student registration clickable demo, you would want to have, maybe fake names, Sam student, Al instructor, Bob the mechanic, whatever it is. You've got some random names, and you may use people like to do funny stuff, like they'll use famous rock star, be Ozzy Osbourne, Alice Cooper, stuff like that. But then, you're going to have classes would be like math 101, computer science 101. Rooms would be, lecture hall B, lecture hall 105. Start dates and end dates would be actual dates that make sense. In class levels or grades or things like that, you're going to put data in that looks sort of real. So it's like, oh, this could have been a screenshot from this, from the future that we've brought back. This is real important when you get into customers that have specific types of data that they deal with. For example, lawyers, healthcare, builders, stuff like finance, things like that, where it's like they're looking for, there's certain data and labels and information they're going to look for in a screenshot. If it's first time you're working with them, you probably don't have it. They're gonna say, well, where would I put this? And you're gonna say, oh, that's, they'd say, where would I put the physician name? You're like, oh, well, this is this thing over here. This field would be like the physician name. Well, now, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but at that point that, oh, I need to like label physician name, and then I'll go, Dr. Bob or whatever it is, so that it looks like a physician name. If it's measurements, anything that's got measurements, try to use real measurements. So if it's stuff like a pharmaceutical app that's listing out drugs, put some just go to like a pharmaceutical website and grab a couple names so that they're real names and that they've got like their values that make sense. So it'd be if it's a 5 milliliter bottle of I don't know, whatever, some drug, pick your favorite drug of codeine, that would make sense as opposed to like a 50-gallon vat of codeine, something like that. So you want these things to make sense, not only to you, but also to the customer that's going to be examining it. As you're going through this, now you should be working on layout and screen flow, because now as you're building these meaning into this data that you've put onto this clickable demo, well, now you're starting to also build out the user experience. So, these are things that, you may have to throw these screens away, but the layout and the flow is, you may have to rebuild it in another tool later, but it is, those are like requirements and things that you can nail down. So you can say, and you'll get this. It'll be stuff like, hey, the first and last name need to be at the top of the form and not at the bottom. Let's put the address down at the bottom because nobody cares about that as much as we do the, like for a student, what grade are they in, or what their, maybe what their the hall is that they live in, things like that. And so you're going to find priorities of the data as you're going through this. So you want to start working on that. And then, of course, you're going to add links and buttons for navigation. We sort of put those in, but we want to, as we've built these things out, we want to put them in meaningful places. So initially, maybe you just slap a bunch of links in. So it would and we'll see an example of this a little bit. You may just throw a few links together, but then as you go further into it, you definitely want to, as you're refining it, let's make it make sense and put them in places that would flow. So if it's a data entry form, you wouldn't put the submit button at the top. You're going to put it at the bottom because they're going to come in, they're going to enter their data, they're going to hit submit. The goal of a clickable demo is you want to get the feedback, but you need to assume that it can all be thrown away. So anything that you do, and the more you invest in a clickable demo, the harder it's going to be for you to throw it away, and the more likely that the throwaway example that you use ends up becoming your final product. You don't want to, and customers will even do that. You'll throw some stuff at them and they'll say, I really don't like this and this and this. And you say, well, we just put 50 hours into solving that problem. And they'll say, oh, well, and then you fall into what's called the fallacy of sunk costs, because they're going to say, well, if we put that time into it, it's got to have value, even though it may not. So, that's, again, as I've mentioned several times, you want to keep it simple. You want to get the ideas across. It may grow into something more complex as you go through iterations, but definitely keep it simple. An example, this is about as simple as you get. And this would be, I just talked about this, where you would have all you do initially is you just throw some links on a page. So this would be like for me, I was like, let's put together a homepage. So this is a goal tracker. This is a very simple clickable demo, which is should be redundant. Clickable demo that I put together for the goal tracker app. just start putting some things together and start thinking through, what do I want to build? So it's like, okay, we've got to start somewhere. That's always, when we talk about first steps, put a home page up, which I did, slapped one in there, and then put some links, because I knew if you look at the create a goal, view edit, enter progress, and progress report, those 4 things basically are use cases that we talked about a few weeks ago. Last time when we talked about use cases, that was it. So I said, okay, well, for my use cases, and this is a good way to start, is I'm just going to put a link out for each of those, because that's going to be a placeholder for me to start building something. And also, as we'll talk about it, as I'm going through and demoing this, I can do it in order. I've got sort of like a script built in on my home page. Now, again, very simple. It's just some links, no buttons, no anything impressive or anything like that. So now if we look at this, like the first one from create a goal, so I click on that in a clickable demo. Now I can jump over to creating a goal. So now what we see is here's a screen. Now this one I've put some, this would be a couple of steps into building it. So the first thing I did is I just slapped in, sort of an end product, is I slapped in the fields that I needed, which was really just the labels. So I needed a short name, difficulty and effort time, description, measurables, deliverables, blah, blah, blah. So I put these together, slapped some fields in, and that was, put some labels in, and that was it. And moved on. Okay, so then I come back a little bit later and I say, all right, well now let's look to make sure that I've got stuff that I've mentioned prior in my requirements, which are these fields. And then to make it a little more useful to somebody reading it, I started adding a few things to make it feel a little more like that. So it's, for example, description, measurables, and deliverables are all big entry. As you can see here, those are like, multi-line text entry, so they can put a lot in there. Effort time, I haven't got an example or anything like there, but it's, it's just a simple one. The short name is obviously a short name. Start date and target date, the name gives it away, but also we've got a little format there and a little, date picker kind of thing. And then, initially I did nothing, but then I came back later and said, well, what are you going to do from here? Well, you're either going to save or cancel. So you're either going to, and so I've, put those buttons in there. And so now you've got a very simple screen, and it didn't take that long to do. Now you may note between these two screens is that there is some, some continuity, that they have a, they've got a little title bar at the top. It's the same look. It's, you've got sort of a consistent, some fonts and things like that, because there are, one of the first things I did is I just said, all right, I'm going to grab Bootstrap. So I've got a responsive library as a base, and then I'm going to slap a few things together so that it's a, roughly responsive and roughly doesn't look bad and has a, some style sheets. So now that you've put some of these things together, you've gotten, this, and in this case, to back up a little bit, I would go in, I'll do create a goal, and I've got a little goal page. Go view and edit a goal. It's basically the same page as create a goal. So I just, went in, made a few changes there, enter progress complete, made a simple screen there, and then a progress report, again, did a very simple screen. And we'll see those a little further on. Because first, I want to talk about, once you've got your screens that you've gotten and your flows that you've gotten from your use cases and your requirements, then we have some additional, there's going to be some transitional features that are going to fall out as you're trying to put this together. So you're going to have screens that are going to, for navigation, whether it's menu items or the home page with links like I've got, whether it's buttons, things like that we should have, but we're probably going to find a few that are gaps. There may be some gaps there. A common gap would be a search and results. So if I wanted to, for example, view and edit a goal, we see that there. If I need to view and edit a goal, first thing I do is I got to select the goal that I want to view or edit. So in order to do that, I've got to have some way, jumped ahead. I've got to have some way to search for it, get a result set back, and select an item. So those are these transitional features that are going to start falling out that may not be in the original, they hopefully were covered in the use cases, but may not be. And also may not be, maybe they were covered in the use cases or implied, and you didn't get them in your first, run through to build out your clickable demo. So make sure you fill that out. It's fleshing it out a little bit. And there's going to be some other things that are often dropped out that you may want to add in as part of a demo to make it more complete, is things like login. And of course, in mine, I think I had, that was just an assumption, was that the user had logged in. We never really talked about it, but or that they're registered. If it's a registered user, well, then you need a registration page, you need a login page. And again, these can be very simple, but if you put these things in, they become, one, conversational points that you guys can talk to with the customer and get the details on, and two, they help show that you thought this thing through, that you start filling in these gaps. And even if it is a clickable demo that's thrown away, there are situations where you may find that you put a clickable demo together, and that becomes a basis for the developers to refer back to. Besides the lengthy text documents that are out there, that may become one of the things that they're using to to document how it's supposed to work. For non-visual features, like if I want to send an email, if I want to log an action or something like that, you can use pop-ups for those. Those are really nice to just do a little, whether it's depending on how you do it. If it's HTML, it's really easy to do a JavaScript pop-up. You can jump away to another little screen or do a little message or something like that. Just a little message boxes say, at this point, we send an email to a user. Those kind of things are great to just say, hey, we're doing these other things. And then as you go through the iterations of building this thing out, initially, you're going to have a little pop-up that says, oh, I emailed so-and-so that this was done. Well, as you go down the line and you start building functionality behind this stuff, you could actually have, when that pop-up comes up, you can then go over and say, see, this is where the email got sent, because you've actually started to build some of that. Or if you're logging an action, you could maybe have a page or, go look at application logs or something like that. So, have some placeholders there, because those are going to help you. If you don't have those, then as you get further down the line, it's easier for those things to fall between the cracks. And then, of course, I had navigational links for additional navigation. You've got your basic self-contained system between the use cases. There's probably going to be some additional things like log in, log out, jump out to other, if it's jump out to another system, stuff like that. And start putting the, cancel, reset, clear, jump to home. Those are kind of things that probably aren't going to necessarily show up in the use cases, but you can go ahead and build those pieces out. So get that to help flesh out your demo. For example, throw a couple more examples out here. So you have to select a goal if you want to edit it. So here's where we can talk about a couple things here. So in the, I skipped the search. There is a potentially there's a search for goals page. I don't have that yet. I just said, well, I'm just going to focus on the results, because I want to list I want to sort of give a feel for what would a goal look like in a result list. And so that's what we've got here. We've got primary, secondary, tertiary, another goal. What's the difficulty? What's the duration? Of course, I haven't laid out, you can see here where I just threw this together real quick, so I haven't laid out necessarily like column headers and some things like that you would want to add. I've got a start date and end date, percentage complete, and then I've got like a little edit link there. So if somebody wanted to edit it, they would click there, presumably, and go edit. I've got a home button, which would be, let's go back to the home. You can see here some stuff where I just have, sort of, some of this is not terribly useful information. I do have difficulty. I have like easy and hard. The goal names are not terribly, ingenious or anything like that. I've got some dates that would make sense from a start and a finish. And then I added up for completion. I put some percentages in there. So you can see, okay, the idea is that it's going to be apparently 0 to 100% complete. So that's, we've got those, and we have in the example, we had reporting, but this is also something that often gets skipped. So think about, as you're going through this stuff, is sort of this goes back to that why. Why am I doing it? Well, depending on what my goals are and what my why is, I probably need to report that to somebody somewhere. Somebody needs to be able to see that it worked and how the data looks and things like that. So that would be reporting. And usually as you're going through and building this stuff out, report ideas will hop into your head. You'll be going through doing something and saying, wow, it'd be nice if I could see a report for this, a report for that. So don't be afraid to throw those in there and suggest to the customer. Say, hey, wouldn't it be useful to have this kind of report or that kind of report? You can build those in a clickable demo. They can be really easy to do. You can do a 3 or 4 line report, even if it would normally be 1,000 lines or 100,000 lines. and then give them something to talk about. Like I said, so typically, requirements, they're going to imply reporting needs. It may be explicitly labeled, we're going to have these 5 reports, which is good, but there's probably going to be some others that are implied, because it's just like, in my experience, people always have some gaps in reporting. That's like always the add-on feature after a project's done. It's like, hey, we could add this reporting and that reporting and this other reporting. And it is, the key is that once people start using it, that's usually when the real need for the reports starts showing up. So it's earlier in the process you can get that, the better. Obviously, you start with the reports that have been defined, that have been required, that have been requested, because those will definitely be in the end product. Once you get those done, if you've got some time, you throw in some reports that you would think are implied, either from the existing reports or from the data. Again, with reports, reports even more so than the other pages, it needs to be meaningful. It's got to be some meaningful test data or example data or whatever that you use as part of your demo, because it needs to look as the end report does to really to sell it and to be able to talk about it, to answer any questions they would have. And then throw some things out there like, if it's going to, this is only 3 rows, but there's going to, some way that you can show that, well, they're going to be able to sort by these fields, or they're going to be able to filter by these values. You'd be surprised, if you haven't done it a lot, you'd be surprised how often those kind of questions come out almost right away. As soon as you show a report to somebody, it's like almost immediate. Somebody will say, well, can I sort by this? Can I sort by that? Especially if it's a lot of data, it'll be questions like, well, can I filter? What if I only want to see the easy tasks? And then the other thing is going to be roll-up data, like number of rows. Am I going to be able to do something where I can count how many of these are past due? Things like that. Those are the things that almost immediately jump out on when you show reports to people. Again, with the demo reports, keep it simple. You can really spend a lot of time on a report, formatting it and making it pretty and doing all kinds of stuff. Right here, very simple report. I mean, it's just a result list, but this would be a very simple report. Didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. A lot of copy and pasted test data, boom, done. You can do something like this and you can get yourself started. If you have additional time, great, you can pretty it up a little bit, but remember, formatting in particular, drop it. Do not bother spending a lot of time on formatting, because one, they're going to pick a whole different font in different format or colors or whatever it's going to be, and two, formatting is an 80-20 rule easily, where the last 20% easily takes 80% of your time. It can get very tedious and time consuming, so just don't go down that rabbit hole. Is focus on the data, something simple that you can display, and then as part of the demo, when you show them a clickable demo, then you get some feedback. They're going to give you the information you need to do formatting right, for lack of a better term, the formatting that they want. And don't be afraid to use a single report to represent multiple reports. So if they want, even the requirements, if there's like 10 different reports they want that are basically the same report 10 times. So it's like, in this case, I want a report that shows I need a report for all of my easy tasks. I need a report for all my hard tasks. I need a report for all of my tasks that are past due. I need a report for all of my tasks that were done in a given year. Yes, need all of my tasks that are current. I need all of my tasks that are complete. That's 6 or 7 quote reports, but it's really the same report with different parameters. So, and don't be afraid to suggest that as well, is to maybe say, this report can actually cover these 10 that you've listed, and here would be the feed into it. So here would be, maybe the first thing you do is you go to the page, you enter some parameters, those parameters then generate the report, and you can show by those parameters that this is going to give you all of my hard task report, all of my easy task report, all of my past due task report. That can be part of what you show. It's going to simplify design, provides a lot of value add, and saves you a lot of time doing the demo, because you don't want to. You can always copy and paste the page 10 times, but you're better off just to just keep links going back to the same one, so you don't end up in copy and paste errors or copy and paste hell. Another good example, very simple report. This would be a progress report. there's my goal name. When was it last updated? What's the status? What's the progress? And I've got a nice little report date. I slap that on the top of it. And of course, navigation back to home. Very simple report. Didn't go nuts on it. And they're immediately going to say, hey, can I do that in a grid? Can I do that in alternating row colors? Can I, these are the labels that I want to have at the top of those columns. This is just like begging for feedback from a customer. And honestly, that's sort of a secret, is do enough that they realize that you understand. But don't be afraid to put some gaps in there that that are decisions that they need to make. So maybe like label names and some things like that, where you can sort of, for lack of a better term, you sort of halfway do it. You just take a stab in the dark at it, but do it in a way that you don't want to get where you're like intentionally not too close to what the end thing is going to be, so that they're going to come in and they're going to it's going to like tease them to correct you and to say, this column name needs to be this. This column name doesn't make sense if you use that label, but let's use this other label. And that's where you're going to start getting some good requirements that maybe they didn't think about originally. Very good use of a clickable demo. Once you've built this whole thing out, it's no use unless you're actually showing it off to somebody. So that's where we have the demo or the walkthrough. The use cases are your guide. You've already talked to your customer about those, or whoever the person is that you're working with. So those are the guide as you're going through a walkthrough. As I said, that when I showed my little homepage that I took those 4 links from use cases. So it's real easy. I have like a script right there. Start at the item 1, work your way through it. The demo or the walkthrough as you're going through it should tell a story. I mean, it should be, those use cases that have built this clickable demo now should be a way to tell a story to your customer about this is how this is going to be used. Don't be afraid to talk a lot about any given page and about how a user is going to come into it, how a user is going to leave it, what your any assumptions that you have about that user and the data that they know or that they don't know. Feel free to talk around those, talk to your pages extensively, particularly on the first couple of walkthroughs, because you want to really give them a feel of this is what a person is going to be experiencing. The demo should help do some of that, but of course, you haven't spent your time refining that and making it really a good user experience. So don't be afraid to say, hey, on this point, for example, I may say, in this report, this is just a very quick example. I'm going to add, one of the things I know I'm going to add is I'm going to have column names at the top of each of these columns. That report date, I'm really going to move that up to the top right because that's just too big and obnoxious. I'm going to have a sort. Each of the columns is going to be sortable. I'm going to have a way to print, or I'm going to have a way to email this report. Those are some things I haven't put here anywhere, and they may or may not be in the requirements, but it allows me to talk to it. It allows me to, whatever I didn't do in the clickable demo, all of that time that I could have spent doing it, now I can talk to it. And the key here is, again, that I want to be able to give a customer something to talk about. But in me explaining this back to them through the clickable demo, it's giving them a way to know that, okay, I understand where they're coming from and what they want, and for them to correct me if I don't. Anywhere that I've missed something, I've got a gap, I don't understand something, the terminology I'm using is not right, they're going to be able to correct me as I'm telling this story. Obviously, as I'm going through it, I want to highlight the features and I want to talk through the options that they're going to have. The features are the things that are, that we've defined in the requirements, and also those steps in the use cases. I want to be able to, as I'm going through, hit on those points that we have highlighted in our documentation. It doesn't have to be thorough. It doesn't have to be like every little feature, but pretty close. I mean, since you've built a lot of this out, you should be able to talk to almost all the features. And if there's something that's missed, you should, like they said, well, how would they log out? Oh, well, we're going to put a log out button here. It doesn't have to be anything big, but and it doesn't need to be as dismissive as I just said it, but you do want to, you want to be able to talk to all of those specifics without rereading the requirements document to them.
Okay, my question is like usually when you're doing these demos, do you have to involve like a business analyst, or this is pretty much like your own idea whereby uh, it's the feedback will help you change the stuff?
Yeah, this is probably at this point you have been discussing this with you've been working with the customer because you put together use cases and you reviewed and they reviewed them and gave you feedback. You put together requirements and they reviewed them and gave you feedback. So there has been an ongoing conversation about this, but like use cases and requirements only go so far. So this is that next step in having that conversation with the customer that's helping them making sure that they see that you have their, share their vision, and where you don't, where they can correct it. So it's sort of like is this good? Is this good? Is this good? Is this right? Is this right? It is an iterative process where you keep saying, sort of like, are we there yet? Not quite. Change these things. Okay, I'm going to change these things. Are we there yet? No, change these things. Are we there yet? Change these things. So and that's why you're going to find usually these clickable demos will also become an iterative approach, because you'll do one, you get a lot of feedback, make some changes, come back a few days later, a week later, whatever your time frame is, you come back later, do it again, get more feedback. And also the trick to all of these things is that there's some things that don't, when you're designing stuff, there are things that don't come up or don't become apparent until you've gotten a certain distance into it. For example, on the, if I do this goal tracking application, if you haven't talked about what is a goal and what's the data that I'm tracking for the goal, then there's going to be reporting and manipulation of those goals that aren't going to be, there's no point discussing, because you haven't gotten the point where you can discuss them yet, because you don't really know all the data. Once you know all the data that you're tracking, then you can start saying, well, okay, now how do we manipulate this data? So now you've got it. So you're building this story as you go. This story that you're telling during this demo, during this walkthrough, you've actually been working on this story with the customer all along. So it should be very natural at this point. And like I said, they are going to, they're going to have some adjustments and changes and additions and things like that. And there may even be subtractions. So there may be things that as we go through that they see it and say, we really don't need that feature. But that's why we want to talk about those, make sure that we're nailing those down. And as you're doing this walkthrough, you want to pause regularly and give a lot of opportunity for feedback. Don't be afraid on like every page that you go through to say, okay, are there any questions or any comments? Is there anything I missed?
Okay.
So moving forward, so once we've gotten through we've built our clickable demo, we've done a walkthrough, everybody's happy except for the changes, because there's always changes. I mean, it's like, I don't care how many times you do it, there are always going to be changes. So rinse and repeat, do it again. You're gonna take the feedback that you got, and then you're going to go back to your clickable demo. You're going to clean it up. You're going to add your features, add to it, and then go do it again. Go do another demo, do another walkthrough, same thing. The story should be basically the same. You may, now depending on your iterations and your timing and stuff like that, maybe it's not the complete story. Maybe you do sections, but you definitely want to keep going back to the story. You want to keep reinforcing that this is what we're doing. This is the user experience. This is how the users use it. So you're going to keep going through, you're going to build all that feedback in, and then there's going to be gaps, so you start, which gaps either from lack of design or for lack of time or effort that you originally put in the clickable demo. At some point, it's going to start becoming a product. So you may throw out the clickable demo and start building something in parallel, maybe that's in, like, let's say you're building a native, a Java application, not web application, but just a Java application. And your clickable demo was built in HTML. Well, what you do then is at some point you may freeze the clickable demo and just say, okay, we have something that is a very simple HTML model of how this is going to flow. Now we're going to start, we're going to flip over to the Java side. You may actually keep doing it and use a clickable demo as sort of a straw man or a talking point. In parallel, you would start building out the Java application. And then at some point you'd be able to say, okay, here's where we did it in the clickable demo. here it is in the Java application. There's some things like that. You may end up doing some parallel development, or you may stop at some point on the clickable demo because you're basically at the point where you say, okay, if we start putting any more into it, we're actually building functionality and turning it into an application as opposed to building the application we want to build. But as you go, depending on the life of it, if you've done it in a situation where what you started to build can eventually become that application, like I said, an HTML demo that eventually could become a full-blown web application, be it PHP or .NET or however JavaScript, whatever. I mean JSPs, whatever. Those are the best kind because then your clickable demo just continues to grow and grow and grow, and then your test date, your hard-coded data ends up becoming data that's being pulled, actually saved and pulled out of a database and manipulated and all that good stuff. And then, of course, you keep just through each iteration, you start making more and more improvements on the user experience, the user interface, the formatting, and all that good stuff. Priorities as you're looking at building a clickable demo. The things that you want to discuss, we obviously want to discuss. We talked about you want to discuss, go through the use cases, you want to go through the requirements, but you also want to focus as part of your story. You want to make sure you're bringing out the high risk items first. Whether that's in a user experience side, that's going to be stuff like reports and some things like data capture and some things like a high risk item in data capture would be, I need to know all of the fields that I'm supposed to capture and all of their data types. So for that, in a data, capturing data, I'm going to start in my clickable demo. I'm going to be labeling it. I'm going to be doing things that are types, type specific. Like, I'm going to have date pickers for dates. I'm going to have numbers for numbers, the right size fields for text. I may add some if there's validation stuff, then I may add some little validation pop-ups and things like that. Those are things that you want feedback as early as possible. If you're building functionality, if you're in a situation where you're actually building true features and functionality into your clickable demo as you go, tackle those high-risk things first. It may be sending and receiving emails, so that knock that out. Go ahead and say, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build this little user interface clickable demo, but then in a couple of weeks we're going to come back and we're going to have the piece that sends out emails based on these button clicks. We're going to have that solved. If it's integration with another system, working with an API or something like that, get that stuff done early on, especially if it's an API that you're not familiar with, that you haven't worked with before. For example, I had a little demo app way back that I was working on for somebody, and it was a very simple clickable demo. It was just some text, and it was doing sharing some information, and it was able to share it and draw it from social networking sites like Facebooks and Instagrams and some places like that. And so as we were doing the demo, we did one initially. It was just pretended that everything existed in the back end, but then systematically would go through and say, okay, now we're going to do Facebook integration. So we're going to actually go do a Facebook login and grab information back from this person. All right, now we're going to go do an Instagram one, and we're going to do that. Now we're going to do, and et cetera, and so on. As you get the high risk items front loaded, because those are the things that are most likely to blow up a project either in a lot greater time than you expected, or you may have to go back to a vendor and you spend a lot of time waiting for them to respond, stuff like that. So get the high risk items sort of front loaded into your demos and your story and how you go through stuff. Add the integrations as they're needed to anybody. So for example, again, let's say we've got a catalog app that's going to integrate with Google. It's going to integrate with Amazon. It's going to integrate with eBay. It's going to integrate with XYZ Storehouse. Well, as you're going through, start walking through those and say, okay, I know, for example, the Amazon is going to be the most complex. I'm going to have a lot of data. I'm going to integrate with them. Go ahead and make that part of it, is go do that integration, have that hooked in. You can leave the other things stubbed out in simple examples, and then later you'll fill those out. Start tying screens together with saved or past data. So data is passed among screens. So if you've got a database on the back end that you're going to use, store the data out there and then read it back in on the next page, or if it's data entry from one form is going to actually lead to output on another form. Start putting those pieces in so it's not just hardwired data or sample data, but it's actually they can go in and play with it. So they can go into a data entry form, they can enter their own name, and then when they hit submit on the next page, you're going to see their own name. So they can see that data moving through the application. Because that you can demo it up, you can mock it up, but it is very valuable to be able to show them doing, show that data traveling through the system because it does, it will expose gaps. It adds to the user experience. Add logging, tracking, and ways to view for them to further view the story. So things outside of the system, like I said, emails, log files, and stuff like that, so that they can actually see where does this data go? How does it, if I integrate with another system, I want to be able to see that data now in the other system. Is there a question?
So what would you consider like high risk items first, like to tackle, like when you're building a software, let me say like a registration software?
So high risk items are always, I think integrations are always the highest risk. Anything that touches a system that I can't control as a developer, as an implementer, that's high risk because it may not work. It may not work the way I need it to. It may need to be changed. What I think, everything that I would do and how I would integrate with that system may not be how they do it. The data that I have to send them may actually affect my requirements. So it may be like product integration stuff is really, this is something like physical product stuff is something where there's a lot of time, there's certain data that's going to need to be sent. So for example, anything that deals with a shipping company, if I'm shipping a product out of I've got a warehouse and I'm shipping a widget out of my warehouse, different shippers have different information. Some of them are going to require like a U.S. Postal Service verify, like the exact address that they have in their system. So I may have to pull back. Some of them may need a 9-digit zip code and 5-digit zip code may not work. There's some things like that. So those integrations are risks. Those are things that I need to know as soon as possible. What does that vendor or that third party need? And do I have all that information? Am I capturing it properly? Am I going to be able to transmit it properly? The next probably big risks are anything internal where I am capturing and reproducing stuff. So database, it's a small risk because everybody uses databases, but I want to be able to, the risk of it is that I've modeled it correctly. So I want to be able to capture data. I want to be able to pull it back in a useful time period. I see that a lot where people will build a database. It's crap as the design goes that's a technical term we'll say. And so they'll go in and they'll build a database and they'll want to retrieve the data, and the database is designed in a way that just the data takes forever to come back. Or the way that they've built the screen is making too many calls back to the database. There's things like, so whether it's the user interface design or the backend design, there's a risk there if it's not going to be able to deliver data in a timely manner. So those are always going to be a risk. And then anything that hasn't been done before, that's usually like the first, that would be obviously I would think the highest risk is if you're looking through a set of requirements and you find there's anything there that nobody has done before or that you don't know that anybody's done it before, that would be high risk. So example, I had a customer years ago that wanted to do a video conferencing app, and they wanted to do it in a way that they could record video. And it's a few years ago, and it's like I knew somebody had done it because there were apps out there that did it, but I didn't know anybody. It wasn't like commonly known, and the people that did it, it was proprietary information. So it's like, okay, I'm going to have to reinvent the wheel. So that was the first thing I did, is like, okay, can I find something that can do that? And I did. I found, actually used Google RTC. Everything was good, or Web RTC or whatever it was that they called it. But so there was a tool out there, but that was the problem I wanted to solve first, is I wanted to make sure that, because I didn't know anybody that had done it, I didn't see anything out there where it was like, initially that it was easily accessible. I want to make sure I tackled that one first. Any other questions?
So would interfaces and let me say batches like outside, would that also be considered high risk? Like, okay, if you're a programmer and okay, you're gonna be interfacing like, let me say bank information, like let me say I'm paying through your website, definitely, because you are interfacing maybe with a bank. So would that could be considered like a high risk too?
Yeah, that would be an integration. Anything like that where I'm trying to deal with a either through an API or maybe some vendor provided control or something like that. Anytime where I'm, like I said, anytime where I'm dealing with somebody, if my system has to deal with somebody or another system that I don't own or control, that is always going to be a high risk because they may or may not interact in a way that makes sense to me.
Okay, gotcha.
All right. So as we're going through and iterating, we'll go back. There's some things we got to keep in mind. We got to start with and remember the requirements. That is got to. If we don't remember the requirements and the use cases and the focus of this whole thing, then it will get out of hand. We can add bells and whistles and all this other stuff that ends up, scope creep, and we want to avoid that. We want to make sure as we're building one, we want to build the navigation flows because those are the hardest to translate into words. It's so much easier. A picture's worth 1,000 words and a flow is worth, I don't know, 10,000 words or 100,000 words. It's so much easier to say you're going to enter this, click this, boom, and them see it versus them having to put it into their, envision it. Particularly as you go through long navigations. Something where it's just like, click here, enter data, hit save. That's one thing. But if it's longer stuff like, like a money withdrawal transaction from an ATM, there's a whole bunch of steps in there. So get those flows together. How does it flow? What does it look like? Make sure you get the forms and the fields in because those are, at the end of the day, those are the requirements, which is, back to bullet point 1. As you're going, start rounding out the interface because that's the user experience. Those are going to be the things that sells the app at the end of the day. That's what is going to make it potentially useful or not so useful. And then, you add in reporting and other finishing touches as you go. Never forget, you need to tell a story the user wants to hear. You're solving a problem, and so they want to hear that this thing solves the problem. As you're talking them through it, they should feel like problem solved.
Okay.
That does it. That will wrap us up for this one. As always, got questions, comments, requests, any kind of things like that, you can throw out on the Slack channel, shoot an email to info@developreneur.com, contact form on the site, join up, all that kind of good stuff. And we'll be talking more about this in the weeks to come.